You're listening to 88.1 FM WVYC, the voice of York College. My name is Keelan Tollinger, and you are tuned in at 3 to WVYC. And thank you for tuning in to this edition of In the Studio, a special one, in fact, because I have a guest co-host for this full hour joining me. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Erin Tollinger. I am Keelan's sister.
Yeah, you seem pretty familiar.
Yeah. I am currently a student at Luzerne County Community College and was doing part-time at Wilkes University.
Okay, so yeah, you're living student life too. You've got a very interesting show to give us today about what you recently did in the past spring break over like early March. It was kind of like a cross-country sort of trip, so I want you to talk a little bit about that today, and we'll get into that. And also, you're a bit of a music freak, so
yes.
you picked out a couple songs that are going to be pretty interesting to play on the show here. So we'll run through all that, but just don't forget that if perhaps this is the first time you're tuning in, I have a YouTube channel that you can go online to and search In the Studio with Keelan Tollinger and find my archive of all my past shows before. I do this, like every Friday afternoon. Pretty soon going to be wrapping up and not do this anymore, but yeah, appreciate it if you could check it out. But this is a special edition, and we'll just jump right into it. What do you say? Ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right. So you were sort of talking a little bit about yourself in the intro. So tell me again sort of like your major and what you're doing now.
So right now at Luzerne County Community College, I am a general studies in science. I was biology, and then I decided to just go with science in general because I'm mainly focused on earth and environmental science, and that would be my major at Wilkes, and I'm also minoring in geology. I just decided that was...
What's geology for everybody? Is that...
So basically, in simpler terms, it's just the study of rocks, especially like rock formations and the rock beneath the earth, and just studying them and what it means, what they do, all that kind of stuff.
Is it sort of like for history purposes? Like, are you trying to say like how the world got here, kind of?
That's definitely part of it. That's part that I find really interesting, and I found geology interesting in general just because I like rocks a lot, and I have a rock collection, so it was interesting to me, and I thought since I already had a lot of rocks, why not just make it a part of my studies?
Okay, but your major thing is environmental science.
Yeah, earth and environmental science with a concentration earth science.
Okay, what does that mean?
So I could have concentrated in engineering, biology, or earth science. I decided to go with earth science only because I want to learn more about the planet and what's on our planet in general. I already took a lot of biology classes, and they just weren't that interesting to me.
So moving right along, I guess, how did you realize that this was going to be your trajectory?
So even when I was younger, even though I liked going outside and doing things outside and taking hikes with my friends, I didn't realize how much the environment meant to me until I got a little bit older, and it was my senior year, and I had no idea what I was going to do with my life. And then in the media, it started becoming popular that people were denying climate change and denying that anything was happening with our planet. And I didn't know that people did think our planet was going downhill in some ways. So I was like, hey, I want to do something to make a change. I want to prove these people that deny it wrong, or at least teach them something. So that's where it kind of led me to my major.
Maybe like an educational role, perhaps you can see yourself? Because I want to sort of ask you, where do these people in these degrees tend to end up?
So a lot of people, specifically in this area, go towards teaching or things with acid mine drainage, since Pennsylvania is such a popular was once such a popular coal mining state. I personally am more interested in natural disasters, more like earthquakes, volcanoes, things like that. So I prefer to go out west and not really teach, but work in the field and do studies on bodies of water and lava and things like that.
Is there also sort of like a countermeasure part to it? So I mean, like you're talking about natural disasters, so perhaps how we prevent against them.
There's so many different routes that people could go, like with the major in general, but for some reason, I've always found natural disasters interesting only because they're not like anything else on this planet, and they're unpredictable in some ways. Not completely unpredictable, but I find like the uncertainty of them interesting, and I want to know more about them. And a lot of natural disasters can't be prevented just because what goes on underneath the earth isn't something that we could pinpoint and do what we want with it. But just like to know more, because even though natural disasters have been going on for so long, we still don't know the science behind tsunamis, let's say, or 100% what happens inside a volcano.
Yeah.
So
Other than that, I mean, I could sort of tell that you were kind of leaning into this because, I mean, I don't know if it was really like part of a factor to it, but I mean, in our front yard, it's like we moved to this place out in Mountaintop around Wilkes-Barre and Scranton, and I don't know who set it up, but there's a drainage area. It's like the water runs through the neighborhood and out to the bottom of the development, but we've also got this shelf of rocks, and I know we sort of like to pick through that when we were kids. Be afraid of finding snakes.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that was part of it, because I think we did save some of those rocks on like our dressers and stuff as kids.
We definitely did both have our own rock collections. I, as a kid, would find like a piece of gravel from the road and find it some unreal, interesting, ooh, look at this shiny piece of solid nothing, and keep it. So I think I just always found rocks cool, and Keelan had his own rock collection, and then as I grew older, I went from taking pieces of concrete to pieces of quartz and
crystals and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You've got a bunch of stuff. You have like several guides, right, for
Yeah.
rock collecting.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's more than a hobby at this point. It is eventually going to become your career, so that's neat.
Exactly.
So
Thank you.
yeah. So we've just pretty much gone through the first part of this interview. We've got to know Aaron a little bit. We're going to take a short break and go into this big trip that you took with your geology club, right?
Yeah, it's our geology club. A lot of people that took ocean science and other environmental science classes.
Okay. So we'll dive into that when we get on the other side of this song break. So coming up next on WVYC is the first song that Aaron picked out, and it's from Beach Fossils. It's their song "What a Pleasure." And my name is Keelan Tollinger. I'm with my sister Erin Tollinger, and we will be back in about a couple minutes and continue our interview. Stay tuned, everybody. Welcome back, everybody, to In the Studio here on 88.1 FM WVYC. I'm your host, Keelan Tollinger, and I still have my special guest with me, Erin Tollinger, my sister. And we're about to get into this special trip that she took over last break in college. And can you tell us a little bit about what you were doing in general?
Yeah, so the Geo Explorers group at Wilkes University and we planned a trip to go out west just because the West Coast has a lot of geographically interesting features and a lot of landmarks and national parks that really are a big deal to our major in general.
Okay, so it was a really long field trip, essentially.
Pretty much. It lasted about 10 days. It was our
Jeez.
entire spring break. So.
Jeez.
Yeah.
I know. I was kind of like surprised on how long you were staying out there and all the things you were doing. So we'll start from square one. And it was a airplane trip of some kind. Well, first let's go into like some of the general stuff. So what do you have to pack for this kind of expedition?
So I have never in my life taken a trip out to the West Coast for 10 days in general. So I packed every possible thing I could think of. Winter things, summer things, all sorts of toiletries, cameras, all the good stuff. It's just the weather on the West Coast always changes from day to night, so I really didn't know what to expect, but I'm glad I packed what I packed.
But you had to carry all of that, didn't you, at all times, or could you leave it behind in some places?
Yes, we had to carry it with us most of the times, except for if we were camping or at a hotel room. We could leave stuff there and then pack our backpacks with whatever we want. But yeah, a lot of the times I was carrying my 36 almost pound
So you weighed it, and
Yeah, our almost 36-pound bags, we had a 50-pound limit, and even though I wasn't anywhere near that limit, I was so scared I was going to go over it, but I didn't. It was still a pain to carry around, though.
All right. So you flew out from which airport again?
We flew out from Newark.
Okay, and you landed in somewhere in Arizona, right?
We landed in actually California, San Diego the first time. And
Okay.
then from San Diego, we had to fly to Phoenix, and that was only a 40-minute flight. It's just we couldn't directly get a flight to Phoenix.
And now I think the first major stop on your trip was the Grand Canyon, and I guess it's a visit that at least some people have made once in their lifetimes. But for people that haven't done it yet, what's probably one word that you could use to describe it?
This sounds very cliche, but breathtaking, only
Okay.
because it's so much larger than you expect. I feel like when we look at media images, they show like one snapshot of someone wandering in like the alleys of the Grand Canyon.
Mm-hmm.
But we saw the top view and got to walk around the Grand Canyon, and just like looking into it, it's never ending. Like it's almost like looking out at the ocean and seeing nothing. That's how it was. It was nothing but rocks for a very long time. Couldn't see past it or anything. But the really cool thing about the Grand Canyon that I appreciated the most was that how many steps and signs they had around to kind of remind you to preserve the Grand Canyon.
Okay.
They had a lot of like environmentally friendly tips and things to do, and also like little games in the gift shop. There was this one door in the gift shop that said, "Who holds the key to the Grand Canyon's future?" And you open it up, you put a little key in and open it up, and it's a mirror. So just like little things that kind of remind you to be environmentally conscious and to take care of the Grand Canyon. I thought that was pretty cool. But
Is it in danger? I guess like pollution in general, but
people tend to see the pretty rocks and be like, "Ooh, I could vandalize that." So
Yeah.
there's a lot of vandalization and a lot of trash because it's just a giant hole. So people are like, "Oh, I'm done with this. Let me just throw it in."
Ugh.
So yeah,
Yeah.
so a lot of things could be like steps could be taken to preserve it more. And just like any other landmark, it's constantly being hit with weathering and erosion. And someday the Grand Canyon is going to look completely different from what we see now. So why not take steps
Yeah.
to slow that process down?
Okay, and you also had to start to make camp in these places, these national parks. So can you tell me a little bit about the process with that?
We did run into some roadblocks with that, and we also didn't actually end up camping in the Grand Canyon like we were supposed to, just because the weather was really bad, and it was raining a lot when we were there, so we ended up staying in an Airbnb, which wasn't an issue at all.
And there's how many people in your group?
There were 13 to 14 of us. It was all students and one professor.
Okay, so you had to rent that much space, that many, well, not rent beds, but find space for all those people.
Which
Had to be a lot.
which was definitely never easy, especially with motels and hotels and Airbnbs last minute, and having enough space to camp just in general with 14 people, that's kind of rough.
Okay. All right, so moving right along to the next big stop on the trip. I think you said this was Zion National Park. And what's significant about this place?
So Zion National Park is one of the most popular national parks in America, one of the most talked about ones.
Really? Because
Yeah.
I haven't really heard of it until this show, honestly.
A lot of people, I mean, besides the Grand Canyon and Glacier and other ones that people talk about the most, in like the geology community, a lot of people talk about Zion only because it's so huge, and there is a very dangerous hike on that too.
Oh,
so
boy.
a lot of hikers and people that like to go outside kind of flock towards Zion only because it's so diverse with what to do and the scenery as well.
Okay. And how was that trip to there? Any roadblocks, as you were saying, obstacles to surpass?
So the night we got there, we had to set up camp, and our campsite was blocked off because there was a landslide.
Okay.
So right where we were supposed to set up our camp, the side of a mountain pretty much
Gave
fell
out.
down onto it and flooded it. So we
Okay.
ended up having to drive around the campsite for about 30 minutes and try to find somewhere else to stay, even though parts of the park were closed off. And we ended up finding a spot, but it was raining as well, so we set up camp in the pouring rain and ate dinner with headlamps on, which that's fine. But the next morning, we were going to hike Angel's Landing. And Angel's Landing is probably in the top most dangerous hikes in America, only because there's been multiple deaths. And
So can I quickly ask, like, so why do this sort of... you're just people that study rocks, so why do you have to go on these dangerous hikes?
I think you could look at pictures of Zion and be like, oh yeah, pretty rocks, but it's not until you're on them and looking at them, and geology, like geologists especially, just, the rocks are pretty, but you care more about the chemical makeup and the stratification in them, what sediments they're made up of, and all that kind of stuff. So when you're that close to a rock, you could physically, like, touch the mountainside or pick them up and see what it's made of. This sounds weird, but smell, taste, whatever it may be, that's how geologists identify the rock. So at least you're up close and personal.
All right, and then the final spot of, like, this first half of the trip, at least, we'll still go into a whole second half later on the show, but I think this was Bryce Canyon, and as a matter of fact, you visited this on your birthday, right?
Yeah, we were supposed to actually go to Bryce Canyon, and we drove through it. We didn't exactly stop at it, but the only reason we didn't is because we didn't have enough time. But on my birthday, which was March 5th instead, we did lots of other cool things. We left Zion and actually went to a Native American reservation.
Okay.
Yeah, it was the Shoshone Indians that once took over that land, and sadly they were run out of that land because of industrialization, and they wanted to build roads. And it's beautiful mountains, so that's why we wanted to go see it, because it's an alley of just Native American reservation that's still there, and cave paintings and things like that, just among, like, beautiful desert.
Cool. Alrighty. And I think you mentioned, just to really finish up this first half, you had to stay in a garage.
Yeah.
So I mean, the camping thing is tough enough.
Yeah, so that made my birthday a little bit more interesting, only because we were planning on camping again, and once again we got rained out. So we had to last minute find an Airbnb in the middle of Utah. And Utah is a very Mormon area, and a lot of, like, the town isn't, hey, come stay here, we have hotels, this kind of stuff. So we were really just looking for anything we could possibly stay in. We found an Airbnb that was just a garage in the middle of nowhere, and we decided to stay in there. And we opened up the doors, and it was ginormous and not anything like the outside looked like, so it ended up being a good place to stay the night.
Okay, actually, so it worked out.
Yeah.
Alright, cool. So we've talked a little bit over 10 minutes, and I think we both need a break. So next up on deck, you've got this song from the band Neutral Milk Hotel. Oh boy. I'm ready to listen to this one too. So coming up next on 88.1 FM WVYC is Holland 1945. We'll be back in about 3 minutes or so here on WVYC. Hope you can stay tuned.
2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Neutral Milk Hotel with Holland 1945 here on the Voice of York College. You're listening to 88.1 FM, and my name is Keelan Tollinger. Thanks for tuning back in the studio. And with my sister Erin, Neutral Milk Hotel is definitely an interesting band. It was quite a messy song, but I remember you came home from, like, middle school or high school or something. I was playing this as, like, making a snack or something. I was like, you asked about it, and I was like, well, you probably wouldn't like it, but here they are, and I think about 5 to 6 years later, you're listening to them too, so.
Exactly, yeah. I was drawn to them only because they were different, and the lead singer's voice was pretty different.
He's crazy.
Yeah, and their music isn't predictable. Like, you don't really know what instrument is going to come next or what's going to happen next, so I gravitated towards the band.
Yeah, it's noisy. I like it. Alright, where were we? So we're going to get back into your trip, the second half of it, and what was the first part of this agenda thing?
So after the March 5th trip, we ended up going to the Valley of Fire, and
that sounds like a really dangerous place from the start of it, so what was going on there?
It sounds dangerous, and there were parts that were pretty dangerous if you weren't looking in the right direction, but it's a lot scarier, like, sounding than it really is. our main concern wasn't anything related to fire, but more of flooding, because it is exactly what it says, and it's a valley of red hot rocks. It's called the Valley of Fire because the rocks are so much brighter and more vibrant than like any other rocks I've ever seen.
Is there a reason to that?
I believe a lot of it is just because there's more iron in it, because that's what technically makes rocks more red in a lot of areas. I don't exactly know why it's so much brighter than other ones besides iron content.
Okay.
But it's definitely a lot more different than the rest of Arizona, and also only because the rocks are so steep down and they kind of like cave in, and you're going through like a very tiny like alley of just really red rocks.
You had to go like single file through it or something, or?
Actually, surprisingly, no. There was enough room for all of us to just walk down in, but it's just like a narrow spot of sand, like just sand, and then really sharp, ragged rocks. Because the rock was so brittle and weak, because it's sedimentary rock, that you could step on a rock and it could break.
Oh,
so that's
okay.
kind of what made it intimidating, just because the rocks were so fragile. And also that there was a flood warning. And the second it starts raining in a place like that, you need to get as high up as possible because you will drown. Just because the valley fills up that quickly with water,
Jeez.
that if it starts raining, you will get flooded out.
Okay. Where did he go next?
So we went from the Valley of Fire to Las Vegas. We were supposed to go to... Yeah, I know, big jump.
It's just like, where are the rocks there? Maybe the ice cubes and the drinks. You don't know. But
Exactly. We were supposed to go to Snow Canyon and the Hoover Dam, because those both, again, have a big part in geology, but we ran out of time at the Valley of Fire, and again, weather kind of interfered. And we needed a day off. We were already planning on going to Las Vegas before the trip even started. So even though there's nothing very environmental science related in Vegas, it was still a really good time, and it was a good night to just relax, even though I spent $30 on a pizza.
well, okay, was it worth it for one thing?
Honestly, no. I decided that the outdoors is more for me. Vegas is probably a once-in-a-lifetime thing, especially because I wasn't 21. I'm
Yeah.
still not 21. So going there was just kind of like, I'll go for food and nothing else. So we all of us under 21 went to a restaurant and looked at the menu and saw $30 pizzas, and we're like, we're in Vegas, we can't back out, we don't know what to do. So we just ordered it, and we were like, we're gonna look really young and really stupid right now if we get up and leave this expensive restaurant surrounded by adults. And we were like, why not splurge and treat ourselves a little bit after eating rice out of a hot campfire pot. So we treat ourselves, and then we walked to the Las Vegas sign. So that was interesting.
Okay, so yeah, that's a stop for everybody in Las Vegas. All right, so your next portion, I see here on the agenda, was the Kelso Sand Dunes. So very fine, grounded down rocks. What was awaiting you there?
Yeah, so we were on our way to California, and on our trip, we saw this really horrible looking dirt road, and we had a rental car, but we were like, yeah, let's go down it anyway. So we drove down this dirt road and found huge, ginormous sand dunes. Now, I've seen Jockey's Ridge in North Carolina, but this was nothing compared to what we've seen on vacation. It was sand for miles on one side of the road, and then when you look on the other side of the road, there's jagged, snowy mountains. So that's the thing about the West Coast a lot. If you look on one side, it's desert, and if you look on the other side, it's mountains. So we just had a big desert awaiting us, a huge sand dune, and there were like death warnings when you walk in, like things like, we hike because we love danger, not because we love the views, things like that.
It still sounds like this is getting further and further away from geology, where you're just like endangering your life with extreme sports or something. But are there like still gates or like registries or something that they make you go through before you get on these sorts of lands?
Nope, there was just a wooden post that was like, you're gonna see scorpions, you're gonna see snakes, good luck. But the reason we wanted to stop here is because sand dunes are interesting specifically because the grains are so small. Like, there's different micrometer sizes of different kinds of rocks, and that means that these rocks have been eroded away and tumbled from a source of water and carried by wind for so long that they got to such like tiny microscopic size. And if you imagine a sand dune miles long, do you know how many rocks that is? How many rocks that broke down to form that?
Mm-hmm.
And it was so grand and big and such a big hike that we were just like, yep, we have to do it. And it was a very hot day in California too.
It's
so
just
that was rough.
amazing. It's just like, there's scorpions and all, but let's just do it.
That was-
Car full of people. You said just a single rental car for all 13 of you?
Yeah, so that's actually where our plans went awry just in the beginning. Even when we got off the plane, this is when everything started going downhill. We were supposed to get 2 vans
Uh-huh.
because we had 13, 14 people. Airport ended up not having that. So they were like, here, a 15-passenger van. Keep in mind, we had almost 15 people with all of our luggage, which was over 22 bags, I believe, in total.
Oh, jeez.
And tents. So yeah, we all became really good friends.
I would
because
imagine.
we were squished in a van,
Uh-huh.
road tripping across the West Coast.
Yeah.
So,
All right, so you went on some sand dunes. Where'd you go next?
Joshua Tree. That was our main goal. We were really excited to go to Joshua Tree in California all week. It's just a really interesting landscape and trees that you can't really find anywhere else. And it's in the middle of, not exactly in the middle, but right on the outskirts of a town in California. And when we drove up, the sun was setting and it was absolutely beautiful. And then we got there and we settled down and tried setting up our camp until we looked at the weather and saw that we were supposed to have 50 to 70 mile per hour wind gusts.
Okay.
And they were warning people not to camp. But at the end of the trip, you barely have money, you want sleep, you kind of have to camp because that's your last resort and you are in the middle of a desert basically. And California is expensive, so we couldn't just stay in a hotel. So we were like, we're going to set up our camp and just fit all of us into one tent. And hope that
All of
holds
you.
the tent down. Yeah, so we...
All of you in a single tent. Okay.
Yeah, so we had plans to make dinner. We, of course, couldn't make dinner because the wind advisory, and you can't burn raw logs and have a fire in the desert when it's windy. So we ate raw vegetables in my tent,
Delicious?
actually. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely nutritious. And we all just fit everyone into our tent, listen to the wind outside, try to stay calm. We ate our food and then ran back to all of our other tents and tried sleeping. We were woken up by, we still believe, I heard a coyote. We
great.
think, at least we thought, or like some kind of bird even. We heard an animal outside of our tent. So we all woke up. And as this was happening, our tent was caving in because
Okay.
the poles were kind of breaking from the wind. So we didn't sleep well that night. We heard animals, we had a windstorm, all that good stuff.
But you survived, and I guess that's the only important part.
Yeah.
Yeah, living in the wild.
Yeah.
All right. So I know it says on your agenda for your trip that you were maybe going to see the San Andreas Fault, and I know at least that place where it's kind of like, well, then again, I guess I don't know. It's like the big rift where they expect California to just sort of break along and float off into the ocean, right? Or is that the wrong interpretation?
That goes hand in hand with it. The San Andreas Fault is especially interesting only because it's, I don't even know how to explain it. It's just such a different formation, and it's just like a huge rock wall in California that kind of, it's constantly growing. Like, the rocks are constantly getting older and things like that and splitting apart. And with the thing about California eventually falling off, which will never happen in our lifetime, our grandkids' lifetime,
Oh, okay.
all of that kind of stuff. Hopefully that is the plan. California will eventually kind of disintegrate. I believe that's going to happen due to wildfires, but that's another thing.
Okay.
But yeah, it's just like kind of a ridge that is just a huge mountain range and very interesting to see just like the growth, and the ocean floor is kind of like spreading it at the same time. So it's geologically really interesting, but we couldn't see it just because we ran out of time.
Okay.
Yeah.
You didn't experience any earthquakes in the region or anything?
No, that would have been very cool though. Honestly,
Everybody would've-
I think to everyone else they would have been scared if an earthquake happened, but I assume California people, natives,
Yeah, they're
know
used
that
to
that
it.
happens all the time. But I would have loved to experience an earthquake, only because, like I said earlier, I like the natural disaster realm of things. I didn't really experience anything outlandish in California that I haven't experienced here. It was just every weather pattern was heightened out there. Like a lot more windy, a lot colder at night, and a lot warmer in the day. It was just such weird weather compared to what we have here. And I didn't see any scorpions, so I'm kind of disappointed. I mean, I didn't want to get like stung by one, but maybe seeing one would have been cool.
Okay. And do you think like the more extreme weather patterns are because all these systems sort of form in the west? Is that right? Because I know like compared to here or on the East Coast, they sort of have time to weaken a bit as they travel across the country. I mean, I know your concentration isn't exactly in meteorology, but I would sort of assume maybe that's the case.
I
But-
assume that might be part of the case. I'm actually not too sure about how the weather patterns form. What I'm assuming is just that the weather is more intense over there, only because, not to say that we aren't dealing with climate change as bad as the West Coast is, but especially on the West Coast, they've been dealing with heightened climate issues, like
Okay.
the wildfires and
Exactly.
earthquakes and all sorts of things. And even little natural disasters, like a tiny earthquake, could affect the weather patterns in general. And the time of year that you go to the west depends on like what kind of weather you'll experience. But yeah, there's jet streams that go from out west to the east coast, and those are typically heightened. Like all sorts of different things play into that. I just think that we had more extreme weather due to the extreme weather that happened earlier. And they have drought issues. So that big rainfall was probably a blessing to some, but also kind of a scary thing because they're not used to that much rain.
In all at one point, yeah. And I think I
Yeah.
did see a report where California is completely out of drought now. I think they're back to average, which is a good thing.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
definitely good. It's
Yeah.
just I believe they'll have to deal with rain and flooding issues now
Mm-hmm.
because you can't get a happy medium, it seems.
It's such a shame. So walk me through how you got back home. Is that sort of the end of the trip?
Yeah, so we had to eventually come back home, which I really didn't want to do, but we slept over a night in Phoenix so we could get to our flight early and travel home, which we did have a jet stream helping us. What would have been a 4.5 hour plane ride was like 3 hours and 45 minutes.
It's crazy.
So it shortened our trip, which was great, but we ended up not getting home until super late. But it was a good trip overall, and
Okay.
I'm happy I came home, even though I would have liked to stay out west for a really long time.
Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about the experience of that whole trip and maybe some of the implications. I mean, I think you described before it was pretty life-changing. So we'll talk about what that means when we come back from this next song break. This one comes from Greta Van Fleet, probably your number one band. Is that right?
Definitely,
Okay,
yeah.
all right.
They're up there.
And this is going to be their song, Brave New World. But take a listen to this song. You'll hear from us again at the other side of the song, and stay tuned to WVYC. You're listening to the voice of your college here on 88.1 FM WVYC. That was Greta Van Fleet with their song Brave New World. And I'm your host, Keelan Tollinger. But that pick was from my sister, Erin Tollinger. We are still going into this interview about her trip on the West Coast over spring break. But yeah, to go back to Greta Van Fleet, that is your band. That is your pick, isn't it?
That is. Greta Van Fleet is one of my favorite bands.
How many concerts have you gone to from them?
I believe I'm at 4 or 5, and I'm going to another one in May.
You already planned it out. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So that song, Brave New World, I think it was off their newest album. What was it called again?
Anthem of the Peaceful Army.
Okay. And what were the lyrics sort of about?
So they pinpoint acid rain and winds and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And overall, the song's message is about climate change and the difference it's making and how it's going to affect our children, our children's children's. As a band, they're very environmentally conscious, and also a group of young people that spend a lot of time in national parks and outdoors. So a lot of their songs have messages about the outdoors and how it's changing. So that's why I chose a song revolving around climate change, because I thought it was fitting.
I think it slots perfectly into your lifestyle. So we were gonna go into the significance about taking this trip. I mean, it was a pretty lengthy trip. I mean, a far stay from home, all sorts of different dangers of the wind and the flooding and the tripping and the falling and everything, but you still wouldn't trade it for anything else.
Yeah, there were definitely a lot of parts where I sat in the rain and things like that, and I wanted to be home. But overall, it's a trip that I will never forget in my entire lifetime. It's a trip I want to go on again so I could see the places that I didn't get to see. And it's also a trip that I think everyone should try to go on, at least in their lifetime. And I know it's out of people's price range or travel range and things like that, but in general, if people just even look at pictures of the West Coast to just get an idea of what it looks like, I would definitely recommend that.
Okay, so yeah, it did sort of empty your bank account a bit, but in exchange you got a bunch of different, like, lifetime worthy experiences. And yeah, that's probably where the most value lies.
Definitely.
So I want to talk a little bit more about just like for the people that are maybe unconvinced of Earth's natural wonders and stuff, and maybe still denying climate change. And what I really want to talk about is like, how significant is this undertaking for you as somebody interested in the natural sciences to understand the bigger picture of all these things? Is the first-hand experience that important, or is it just enough to just sort of listen to all the media reports on things going on, or experience it secondhand?
I'm on either side just because I think everyone in general should try to educate themselves even a little bit on what's happening on our planet. And I think I was lucky and grateful enough to go out west and experience it firsthand, and it did teach me more about what's happening in our environment, what's happening in our country, let alone, but I know that not everyone could do that. So I think if someone just sits down, spends some time each day reading a news article or going on Reddit or looking at tweets, anything just revolving around planet Earth would help a little bit. And I just think it's something we should get educated on and read into, only because this is our only habitable planet as of right now, at this time. So why not take care of it, since this is where we will be spending the rest of our lives?
Exactly.
Yeah. And I just think it's such a bigger issue than we think. And if you can't go out west or you can't go out east, wherever anyone is from, even if you step into your backyard, like even here in northeastern Pennsylvania, if you go to Nanticoke, you could see rivers that are almost orange. And especially the Susquehanna River, that has so many negative environmental impacts to it, as it affects the fish, the amount of different chemicals and elements in that affects all of us in general, anyone that lives by it. But you could see just little environmental impacts, whether you go outside, even in weather patterns that happen. Like, environmental impacts affect us all in ways we don't think of when we wake up. But environment is what is all around us, our atmosphere. So I think it's pretty important to think about and to care about.
It is an intersection about culture, because you have people living within these lands and they want to establish homes there, perhaps. I mean, you were mentioning the Native Americans, how industrialization took over and maybe screwed up some stuff with the environment. The economy as well, the places we farm, the land we use and for resources and things like that. A lot of it sometimes is unable to be replaced. So understanding that balance and conservation, and especially at this point where some people might not have that sort of future-mindedness, who are sort of living in the now and sort of saying, we can use this forever. I don't want to bring in Donald Trump too much, but I mean, you know, with what he says about climate change perhaps not being as big of a factor as it might be to someone like you, who is experiencing these different like cultural and geographical experiences firsthand. I think you definitely have a leg up as far as understanding the bigger picture.
Thank you. And that's another thing, going back to Donald Trump, something that kind of made me also steer more towards my major, just because he has a voice, as much as we sometimes don't want to admit it. Whatever it may be, he has a say and people will listen to him, especially since he's the president now. And him denying or being around the bush of climate change kind of got me angry. And I know I'm just a little girl in NEPA and a lot of people won't hear my voice. I think it's important to take baby steps and to do something that'll create a change, just so it'll eventually change or have an impact on the bigger picture, on the environment in general.
For generations in the future.
Exactly. And whether I have kids, whether you have kids, I want whoever lives in the future to have an enjoyable life and not breathe in pollution and swim in a garbage patch.
Exactly, because it is about our longevity and our health and everything. It's crazy just how I mean, you went from like studying the earth and rocks and everything, but now you're also talking about bigger picture issues and things like that. I think it's pretty phenomenal, just like how far-reaching it is.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's important to look at the bigger picture and to act in the now. It's just never put the future on the back burner.
Cool.
Yeah,
All right.
thank you.
So we've got just a little bit of time left on the show here. We've got one more song that we want to get through for the hour that Aaron has picked out. This next one, tell me if I'm pronouncing it right, Camp.
Yep.
And their song Books. So that's about a 4-minute song. And when we come back from that, we will close out the hour here on WVYC. Hope you stay tuned, everybody. Camp with their song Books here on 88.1 FM WVYC. You are in the studio for a little bit while longer. I'm your host, Keelan Tollinger, and I'm with my sister, Erin. We've had a pretty fruitful hour discussing her trip over spring break, but we're just about to call it quits for this hour this afternoon. But do you have any like final thoughts to tack on to this whole trip?
I thought it would be useful to add in that even though I urge everyone to go outside and take risks and do hiking trips that are outside your comfort zone, I think it's also important to be conscious when you go on them, and that's something we might not think of when we climb a giant mountain or jump off a cliff into a body of water, all that kind of stuff. I think it's important to be conscious and to be safe, especially since someone sadly just died at Angel's Landing. Like, I just hiked a month ago. He was just hiking it like a normal person, but when you do hikes, make sure they aren't slippery. I think that is the reason he died. But and also just be smart about what you're doing. Don't deface rocks, like draw on them. And I know it might be cute to carve you and your significant other's initials into a tree. Don't do that either. It's just do things that help.
Take pictures, but don't take selfies, I guess, facing the cliff sides and everything, because, I mean, accidents do happen that way as well.
That's true.
Because, yeah, I guess it's one thing to encourage people to go outside and experience nature, but it's another thing to have them live with it responsibly and safely.
Definitely.
Because if you're not prepared, if you're not in, like, a group or something, especially, there could be some adverse effects to that.
Definitely. It's just important to be smart altogether. Be aware of your surroundings, all sorts of things. And I don't mean this in a selfish way, but also think of if you were to ruin this park for any reason, that could also ruin it for goers in the future. They could shut parks down, they could never let people go back in, they could cut down the tree that you rode on. Like, whatever happens has adverse effects.
Okay. And another last thing, I guess, as far as action, perhaps, if people are, like, interested in supporting natural parks or something like that, are there ways for them to do that?
So there are, there's a lot of sketchy websites that say, hey, this money will go to X national park, especially things like GoFundMe. I think, while not all of them are sketchy, it's important to go to and from the source. So if you were in the Grand Canyon and wanted to support the Grand Canyon, go to the gift shop in the national park. I know there's National Park Project on Instagram that I follow, and they sell shirts and stickers and all sorts of things that go directly to the parks and to park preservation. And even parks in your area, if you go to them and ask how you could help, how you could donate money, go to the source, do it that way. Don't go through any sketchy websites.
Okay. Gotta play it smart.
Yeah.
So yeah, you definitely, I think, learned a lot in this trip. You definitely know a lot about the environment and everything from what I've just been hearing in this past hour. Wow, what a great show.
Thank you.
So I just wanna thank you as we close this out for doing this and teaching us a lot today about what's going on in the environment and where you've been and how you've survived. And anything else to add before we close things out?
I would just like to say thank you for having me, and also thank you for inviting me in such a creative way, because when I came back for my trip, he gave me a scrapbook to put all my pictures in, and inside the scrapbook hid an invitation to be on his show. So I'm really grateful that I was able
Meant
to
a
do
lot.
it.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that a lot.
And thank you for that.
Yes.
So, yeah, that closed everything out. We will pretty much be, well, I will be back, I guess, next week here on In the Studio. But that'll just about do it for this special edition. If you want to re-listen to it, perhaps, or any of my previous shows here on 88.1 FM, you can go online to youtube.com and search In the Studio with Keelan Tollinger, and you'll find an archive of all my talk shows, all the monologuing without the music. But, yeah, take care, everybody, and thank you for listening to this show. Once again, my name is Keelan Tollinger.
And I'm Erin Tollinger.
And take care. Have a good weekend, everybody.